Sunlit Smiles, Tiana's decision to choose herself that night in St. Lucia felt like a weight lifting, but it also left her with a quiet ache. As she sat on her balcony the next morning, watching the sun rise over the Caribbean, she replayed her conversation with Lucas. His words, "If you ever want to find me, you know where I'll be," echoed in her mind. She held his card, a simple white rectangle with Lucas Bennett travel writer printed in clean font, his phone number scrawled in blue ink on the back. There was something about his steadiness, his quiet confidence, that drew her in. He'd given her space to heal, to breathe, without demanding anything in return. Yet she could tell he wasn't the kind of man who'd let himself be used. He knew his worth, and that made her respect him even more. Lucas, at 38, was a man who'd lived enough to know what he wanted. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, he'd spent his 20s chasing adrenaline, rock climbing in Yosemite, surfing in Australia, writing stories about his adventures for travel magazines. But a near-death experience on a mountain in Peru 5 years ago had shifted his perspective. He'd been caught in a sudden storm, stranded for 2 days before rescue arrived, and the ordeal taught him to value connection over conquest. Since then, he'd been searching for something real, someone who could match his passion for life without draining his spirit. Tiana, with her sharp wit and unguarded laughter, felt like that person. He'd known from their first conversation at the beach bar that she was special, but he also sensed her pain. Lucas wasn't one to push. He'd been hurt before by a partner who'd used his affection as a crutch, and he'd vowed never to let himself be taken advantage of again. Still, he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward her. Back in Atlanta a week later, Tiana threw herself into her routine, trying to rediscover the woman she'd been before Ethan, before the wedding that never happened. She spent mornings at her favorite jazz cafe, sipping coffee and sketching ideas for the bakery she'd always dreamed of opening. One evening, as she flipped through her journal, she found Lucas's card tucked between the pages. Her heart skipped. She hadn't called him, unsure if she was ready for whatever came next. But fate had other plans. She was at a local art gallery opening in Midtown Atlanta, a networking event for small business owners, when she heard a familiar laugh. Turning, she saw Lucas across the room, his blonde hair catching the light as he chatted with a group of artists. He wore a navy blazer over a white shirt, his green eyes crinkling as he smiled. Tiana's breath caught. Before she could decide whether to approach, he looked up and saw her. His smile widened, and he excused himself, crossing the room with that same confident stride she remembered from the resort. "Tiana," he said, his voice warm. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I live here," she blurted, then laughed at how obvious that sounded. "I mean, Atlanta's my home. What about you?" Lucas's eyes lit up. "I'm based here too. I travel a lot for work, but my apartment's in Decatur." "Small world, huh?" They spent the rest of the evening talking, the gallery's buzz fading into the background. Tiana learned more about Lucas's life in Atlanta, how he volunteered at a community center teaching kids to write, how he loved hiking in the North Georgia mountains, and how he'd once tried to bake a cake for his sister's birthday, but ended up with a kitchen full of smoke. "I'm better with words than recipes," he admitted, laughing. Tiana shared her own stories, her love for jazz, her dream of opening a bakery specializing in Southern desserts, and the way she'd always felt torn between stability and chasing her passions. Lucas listened intently, his gaze steady, and she felt that same sense of being truly seen that had drawn her to him in St. Lucia. Over the next few weeks, they started seeing each other regularly. Their first official date was at a jazz club in Little Five Points, where they swayed to a saxophone solo, Lucas's hand resting lightly on her back. He was respectful, never pushing her to define what they were, but his actions spoke of his feelings. Small gestures like bringing her a coffee when she had a long day, or texting her a photo of a sunset from one of his hikes with the caption, "Thought of you." Tiana admired his strength, the way he carried himself with quiet assurance, but she also saw his boundaries. When she once canceled plans last minute, he was understanding but firm. "I get that things come up," he said, "but I'm not here to be an afterthought. Let me know what you need." His honesty made her respect him more, and she found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with Ethan. Their bond grew through shared experiences. They hiked Stone Mountain one crisp fall morning, Tiana teasing Lucas about his overpacked backpack. "What, are we camping for a week?" And him grinning as he pulled out a thermos of hot chocolate to share at the summit. They spent a rainy Sunday at Tiana's apartment, where she taught him how to make her grandmother's peach cobbler, laughing as he fumbled with the dough. "You're hopeless," she said, swatting his hand playfully, but her heart swelled at his effort. Lucas, for his part, found himself captivated by Tiana's warmth, her resilience, the way she lit up when she talked about her dreams. He loved how she challenged him, how she'd call him out when he got too caught up in his own head, but always with a smile that made him feel safe. One evening, 3 months after they'd started dating, they sat on Lucas's balcony, overlooking Decatur Square, the city lights twinkling below. Tiana leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and said, "I think I'm falling for you." Lucas turned to her, his green eyes soft but serious. "I've been falling for you since that first daiquiri in St. Lucia," he said, his voice steady. "But I need to know you're in this for real, Tiana. I don't want to be a rebound or a distraction. I want us, all of us." His words carried the weight of a man who knew his worth, who wouldn't settle for less than he deserved, but who was willing to give everything for the right person. Tiana looked at him, her heart full. "You're not a rebound, Lucas. You're my choice." She kissed him then, a slow, deep kiss that felt like a promise. Their love grew from there, rooted in mutual respect, shared laughter, and a quiet certainty that they'd found something rare. Tiana opened her bakery the next year, with Lucas by her side, and as they danced at the opening party to a jazz tune, she knew she'd found her true home, not in a place, but in him.